Morning, everyone. So, yes, we've got to discuss the reshuffle yesterday, most especially whether the decision to bring David Cameron back will work out for Rishi Sunak at all. Now, obviously, let's just, we'll ignore the complete extremes. It's not going to be a totally disastrous result for him, and it's certainly not going to help him win. There's been some utter lunatics trying to suggest, oh, there was someone actually, was it on LBC or something yesterday, trying to suggest that, oh, this has actually increased Rishi Sunak's chances of still being prime minister in a couple of years. And it's like, no, not remotely. But if the Tories are being sensible and are in damage limitation now, then it does help. First of all, one thing that has definitely worked is it has overshadowed Suella Braverman. If Rishi Sunak had have just sacked Suella Braverman and, let's say, a little minor reshuffle, she would have been on the front pages of every newspaper the following day. So let's have a look at the following day. I'm not going to throw it up on the screen, but just to go through. So the Guardian, it's David Cameron. Like, she's mentioned, Suella Braverman's mentioned, but you've got, what leaps out at you is David Cameron on the Guardian. The Telegraph, David Cameron. The Daily Mail, David Cameron. There's a picture of Esther McVeigh on the front page of the Daily Mail, not Suella Braverman. David Cameron and Esther McVeigh. Suella Braverman, who's she? The Times, David Cameron. The Eye, David Cameron. The Sun, David Cameron. The Mirror, David Cameron. The Express, there's David Cameron and Suella Braverman there. But her name isn't like writ large. The Financial Times, David Cameron, although they do mention Braverman as well. The Metro, David Cameron and Suella Braverman, but like most of the front page is Bobby Charlton. And the Star, actually, has got nothing to do with it. So basically, she'll have been thinking, oh, I'm so important, I'm so pretty. He'll sack me, and the whole of the media will be really sad, and I'll have my face on the front page of every newspaper. And it's like, no, love, it's not there. They're not interested. So in a way, if it does nothing else, bringing David Cameron back, if it does nothing else, it's completely overshadowed Suella Braverman. But then, let's go with what the Star's gone with. Yeah, the Star's gone with the bold truth, rise of the slapheads. 88% of women love chrome domes. That's the Star. They've mentioned Bobby Charlton's funeral as well. But what's interesting, I'm just going to throw something up here. Because the reason why David Cameron will have been brought back isn't just for one day to keep Suella Braverman off the front pages, right? That would be ridiculous, even for Rishi Sunak. It's because he's changed direction again, by the way. Oh, what he was talking about last month, yeah, that's gone. That's completely gone. The long-term future, break with the past, that is brought David Cameron back. I mean, for goodness sake. People are now pointing out, in fact, two things that are worth pointing out about the top four. So if you think about the top four most senior members of government are always the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, the Home Secretary, and the Foreign Secretary, right? So of those four, you've got Rishi Sunak, who campaigned for Brexit, but he wasn't a big Brexiteer, but he did campaign for Brexit. You've got James Cleverly, ERG, so he campaigned for Brexit. But then you've got Jeremy Hunt, Remainer. Then you've got David Cameron, who led the campaign for Remain. Okay, it was a crap campaign, but he was nonetheless lead Remainer, right? So you've gone from a top four, which under Boris Johnson were all Brexiteers, to now where it's 50-50. And you wouldn't, of the Brexiteers, like you could argue Jeremy Hunt and David Cameron were leading Remainers. You couldn't really describe James Cleverly and Rishi Sunak as leading Brexiteers. Hence the reason why Brexiteers are doing their nut. The other thing worth pointing out, just for Graham, is that this is the first time since 1964. Like, we talk about how much of the cabinet under the Tories are privately educated, but this is the first time since 1964 that all four of those top positions have been held by people that have been put, who went to public school, which is private school for people outside the UK, or a particular type of private school. So that's an interesting one. But he's brought back to try and shore up support in the winnable seats, the seats that used to be safe Tory seats and are now very marginal. Basically, the blue wall. They're ignoring the red wall. That's a sound decision. They're focusing on the blue wall. Can David Cameron appeal to them? So here is a poll in YouGov. Now, I'm just going to point out how you could look at this and you could go, okay, the question specifically, what it says, I'll read it out to you. Former Prime Minister David Cameron has been appointed the new Foreign Secretary. Do you think this is a good decision or a bad decision? Okay. So Graham's saying Braverman was privately educated. I don't think that's true. It's not privately educated, specifically went to public schools. Slightly different thing. So these are like the top private schools that specific. They're not like the ones down the road that just have small class sizes and you pay for it. These are different beasts. So anyway, the majority say it was a bad decision, right? But you've got a huge number of people who don't know. Now, straight away, you look at it and you think, okay, he doesn't need it to be universally popular. David Cameron's not popular, right? Remember, there were people who voted for Brexit just to piss off David Cameron. We'd have actually been better if he were on the Leave side. If David Cameron on the Leave side, we might have had a better chance of winning, right? So you need to break it down. David Cameron is intended to appeal to some of those undecided Conservative voters in the southeast of England, in the blue wall. So then you go to region. It's still not looking good there. If we look across in the rest of the south, actually, there's more people think it was the right decision in London. That's bizarre. But in the rest of the south, 28% think it's a good idea to 37 who think it's a bad idea. So, okay, it's more in favor of him than other regions, particularly like the Midlands. It's absolute disaster area. They really hate David Cameron. But rest of the south, 28 to 37. But even then, you could look at it as those 37% are probably people who are not voting Conservative anyway. So you'd probably say, wouldn't you, just at the moment, before I show you something else, maybe it works. So maybe some of those 28% are the undecided Conservative voters, and maybe some of the other Conservative voters are the ones who don't know, so they don't really care. But what is weird, and again, I wish I could apply both filters. I wish I could apply politics and regional filters at the same time on this, and I can't. But if I look at politics, and I look down to Conservative voters, it's quite evenly split. So I don't really know. Because it could be that this 36% of Conservative voters who think it's a good decision are the ones in the Tory heartlands or those sorts. And the 35% who think it's a bad decision might be ones in, say, the Midlands and the North. But I've no way of knowing that. So I'm going to actually say, this polling, unfortunately, it's not quite asking the right questions in enough detail. It doesn't really help me. Even amongst the elderly, like if we do it by age group, like no matter how you do this, there's a majority against the decision compared to in favor of it. It really doesn't matter how you break it down. Like David Cameron's not a popular man. But there we go. Graham's saying, Rachel has a theory. Cameron's just imposed to get the India-UK trade deal through ASAP. Then Rishi will be free to call an election with his £1 billion worth of Infosys shares and bugger off to the USA. So yeah, in terms of, yes, benefit to Rishi Sunak, because Rishi Sunak, I completely agree. I don't think Rishi Sunak really cares about the election results because I don't think he intends to be around afterwards. So is he there to try and get that India trade deal? That's possible. Certainly, that would explain why they wanted him as Foreign Secretary, because you could have just said, well, why not have brought him in just to replace Braverman as Home Secretary? That is possible, yes. The fact that he's brought him in as Foreign Secretary implies some sort of involvement on a diplomatic front abroad. It's still doubtful that Sunak can get that in time, though, because I think it's I can't see the election being next autumn. I think the events of the last week have made that less likely, because now the Conservatives are, they're not, I don't think there's going to be a civil war. So the other thing to note is people may have seen Andrea Jenkins talking about issuing a confidence, like throwing in a letter of no confidence in Sunak, and everyone's going, oh, it started. It's like, no, it hasn't started. I think Angela Jenkins had already thrown her letter in. I think she just produced a duplicate last night. I don't think there's a rush of letters going in at all. If there were, we'd soon find out about it, because although we can't, only Sir Graham Brady knows like the situation with the letters have to go to his office. So there are people in Parliament who keep an eye on letters going to Sir Graham Brady, right? So unless they see a sudden flurry going to him, then it doesn't mean anything. Will Cameron try to make any approach to rejoin the EU? No. So the government position, and they were asked about this yesterday, the government position is still pro-Brexit. So David Cameron, while he's Foreign Secretary, because of ministerial responsibility, no matter what he privately thinks about Brexit, and bear in mind, even as a private citizen, he's not been like Michael Heseltine. He hasn't attacked Brexit since he's left politics. He hasn't really attacked Brexit. He's been more circumspect. But certainly as Foreign Secretary, if it is still the government's position, which it is, that it's pro-Brexit, Cameron wouldn't be able to say anything else. But he can, he's certainly not, we know he's not someone who actually believes in Brexit, despite what he may publicly say. We're saying there, Mr. Brady, I would like to, it'd be Sir Graham, she would have to call him. I'd like to withdraw my letter so I can send it in again later today. She'll have just sent another one. Because here's the thing, like at the end of last month, we were told, or sometime last month, we were told about 20 to 25 letters had gone in, right? Andrea Jenkins would have been one of those letters. She would. She's a nutter. She's a proper, she absolutely hates Rishi Sunak. She's a real Boris Johnson loyalist. Absolutely, she would have put her letter in already. The other thing is there was this meeting of the so-called New Conservatives, who are like if you think about the Conservative Democratic Organisation being a Boris Johnson support club, the New Conservatives are like a Suella Braverman support club. So they will be working to try and get Braverman installed as leader when Rishi Sunak steps down. So they had a meeting yesterday. It turns out there were about 8 people there, not all of whom are necessarily, I think there's only actually 8 members of this group. So if there was 20 people there, 12 of them were just sort of interested parties who may or may not join that group. We were told that the mood was that they didn't agree with Braverman's sacking, but there was no discussion about putting letters in. It would make no sense for them to put letters in. I would be, you can never rule anything out where MPs are concerned, because MPs are not bright. It doesn't really, we're not just looking at Tory MPs. MPs in general are not that bright. Yeah, so but it doesn't, it's not in their interest to have a confidence vote in Sunak, because all it does is it makes it harder for them to win their seats in the next election. It just damages the Tory party. They can't replace Sunak. The vast majority of Tory MPs do not believe that they can sensibly replace the leader again. And they certainly don't believe they have a viable alternative anyway. So all it can possibly do is harm the Tory party, make them look even more clown-like, and cost them more seats in the election. So in actual fact, Braverman's team will probably just go along with this. They need to make it clear that they don't agree with Sunak's direction of policy, but there's no point in them trying to actually bring him down. Doesn't suit them. William's saying, Jenkins is my MP's wife. He spends more time in her constituency than he does in ours at Westminster. Well, at least he's spending time in some constituency. That'd be quite useful. Mad Naz must be pissed off. It's so easy to get a peerage these days. It is easy. It's a piece of piss. All the Prime Minister has to do is say, I want this person in the House of Lords. Done. Gone. She was actually saying on Twitter yesterday, I think she said it on her TV program, but she repeated it on Twitter. She said, oh, I see it's easy to get into the House of Lords when you went to Eton. And I actually said to her, it's easy to get into the House of Lords for anyone. It would have been easy to pop you into the House of Lords. No one wanted to do it, that's all. They could put me in the House of Lords tomorrow if they wanted. Piece of piss. Cameron won't negotiate anything in Europe. His track record is consistent failure there. Well, that's interesting. So let me read something out that someone said about David Cameron. I don't know who said this, by the way. A Google search will find it, but I haven't found it yet. It's just someone clipping it on Twitter. Mr. Cameron's return is Baron Cameron now, but Mr. Cameron's return is a peculiar one, given his record. A man who bungled British foreign policy will now help shape it once more. A government struggling to figure out how to repair public services has appointed the man who more than any other caused their current difficulties. A man who deserted his office is now painted as an example of duty. In British politics, the appearance of competence is more important than the evidence of it. Aesthetics trump achievements. Nothing demonstrates this more than the renaissance of Mr. Cameron. And that is essentially true. Like, Cameron is not popular. He hasn't like achieved popularity because of it. It's not like absence has made the heart grow fond or anything. He wasn't popular when he left politics. He's not popular now. He's not really particularly well regarded. But if you look at the state of our political leaders since David Cameron, if you look at the last 5 prime ministers, David Cameron, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, and Rishi Sunak, who would people, I think I saw a poll recently, but who would people put at the top of that lot? David Cameron. Particularly in terms of Conservative voters. So it's like, although on no level was David Cameron a successful prime minister, he's got the only success he's got. If you were to ask him what his success was, he would say, I won a majority in an election. That's his success. He became prime minister. He did himself. He had a personal achievement, but he achieved nothing of benefit to the country, only damage. And yet, because he's still head and shoulders above the other political leaders we've been having to deal with in the last few years, this looks like Rishi Sunak actually taking government seriously for a change. Would it be allowable for the Tories to make him PM again from the Lords? Yes, they wouldn't. It's dodgy enough having. There were people yesterday saying, how can we have a cabinet minister in the Lords? This is unprecedented, isn't it? It's like, no, it's not even unprecedented in recent times. Do they not remember? We've had cabinet ministers in the Lords. Zach Goldsmith, David Frost. David Frost was Zach Goldsmith just attended cabinet. He wasn't a Secretary of State, but David Frost was. Boris Johnson made David Frost Brexit minister, Secretary of State. He was the Secretary of State. He had a government department that he ran, right? And it's not just that he was in the House of Lords. He'd never been elected ever in his life. So it's not unusual. Labour have done it. Andrew Adonis and Peter Mandelson. They were in the House of Lords when they were serving in Gordon Brown's cabinet. They were MPs when they were serving in Tony Blair's cabinet, but then they went to the House of Lords, and then Gordon Brown brought them back. And as people have pointed out, in the early 80s, Margaret Thatcher had a foreign secretary who was in the House of Lords. So, it's not even remotely unprecedented. It's just that it's so unusual that people think it's a bit weird. Replacing Braverman as Home Secretary with Theresa May would have been more awesome trolling of Braverman. Yeah, but like, I mean, Graham has alluded to there, there'll be some reason why Rishi Sunak wanted David Cameron specifically, because there were others he could potentially have brought back. And Theresa May is an MP, so yeah, that would have been easier. There were others. There will be some reason that Sunak wanted David Cameron specifically, and specifically wanted him to be Foreign Secretary. You know, Rishi Sunak is not someone who really cares about the election. That's not to say it's not why, you know, so why am I talking about him appealing to people in the blue wall? He does care what the polls say because his own MPs care. So for Sunak to be able to call the election when he wants, when he's finished doing what he wants to do, which is to make loads of money, he needs his MPs on board, because you can't just say, because it would be a mad idea to bring him down and have another change of leader. Sunak can't be so arrogant as to believe that there are no circumstances under which that would happen. So he has to at least give the impression he's trying to win the election. He has to do that. But for Sunak's point of view, this will be purely financial, and it could well be that it's to do with an India trade deal. I'm just not sure that Sunak's got enough time to agree it and ratify it, even if he tried to have the election next autumn, which I think would be a very bad idea for the Tories, not necessarily for Sunak, but for the Tories. How both Cameron and Osborne said to the COVID inquiry that austerity made us all live longer, made us healthy, and prepared us better for the risk. Yeah. Yes, I don't think the COVID inquiry will draw the same conclusion, if I'm honest. I think they are more likely to draw the conclusion that austerity massively diminished the capacity of the NHS to cope. Any thoughts on how this will play out? The PMQs, as Sunak dodged the firing squad on any level. Oh, no. When it comes to PMQs, Labour's line, I mean, they've already been testing it out yesterday. It's really very simple. So Starmer has got a load of easy attack lines straight away. First of all, Rishi Sunak has basically said to all of his MPs, none of you are good enough to be Foreign Secretary, because he's brought someone who's not an MP to become Foreign Secretary. So that's Rishi Sunak saying the lack of talent amongst 350 odd Tory MPs is so lacking that I've had to dig up an old fossil, right? Not that old a fossil, but still. So that's one easy attack line. The second easy attack line is Rishi Sunak was only last month, saying that all previous prime ministers were failed. They were pursuing failed politics. That included David Cameron. Rishi Sunak, in order to justify his salting the earth for Labour by cancelling HS2 and other such things, had to label people like David Cameron as pursuing a failed model of politics. So now he's brought him back. So that's fairly embarrassing. Rishi Sunak was also trying to say he was making a break with the past. You know, he was doing things a very different way. And now he's brought in part of the Tory establishment and a former prime minister. You know, in fact, again, if I go back to those top four positions, so I've already lots of interesting things about the top four. Two of them were in the cabinet in 2010. Jeremy Hunt and David Cameron were in the cabinet in 2010. So rather than making a break with 13 and a half years of Tory failure, he's 50% of his very, very top team were in that 2010 cabinet. So there's so many lines of attack. And then, of course, there's all the things with David Cameron, that the fact that in most people's eyes in this country, David Cameron is responsible for some failure or other. Like, even if you think about I don't think Labour will push this line too much, but if you think about Brexit, for example, so to Remainers, David Cameron is the guy who, first of all, introduced the referendum when he didn't have to because he was too weak, and second, applied no safeguards at all. The legislation should have, at the very least, said, look, this referendum requires that we do not actually know what leaving means. So there has to be a second referendum on the terms of exit if people choose to leave. There was zero safeguards in place. He just asked the question and left it at that. So from the point of view of Remainers, David Cameron's not exactly our favourite person. From the point of view of Brexiteers, he nonetheless led the Remain campaign. So he's clearly a Remainer. And, you know, so, but on other things as well, David Cameron was along with George Osborne, was Mr. Austerity. So the people who are, who suffered from austerity are not going to appreciate David Cameron. If people have an interest in foreign affairs, David Cameron dropped the ball in so many areas with that. So it's like, you know, so there are lots of lines of attack for Labour. I don't expect them to pursue the Brexit line, but there are plenty of lines of attack. They can attack Sunak and they can attack Cameron. Starmer will struggle to think of 6 questions. So he'll be thinking, right, of these 100 things I could ask, which are the 6 most damaging things to ask about? So I think it is very likely to feature. It might be that Starmer doesn't even bother to mention Suella Braverman because basically she's been sacked now. He could try and poke at the fact that she was allowed to remain in place long enough to incite violence, which put 9 police officers in hospital. He might make some mention of that. But at the end of the day, whatever damage that will have done, probably with the public, is limited because she has now gone. She's on the back benches. So the main lines of attack will surely have to be against Sunak and Johnson. Teresa Coffey retraining as a pole dancer. Yeah, she's gone completely. The fact that she was in Downing Street for so long yesterday suggested to me that Sunak wanted to demote her rather than sack her. She was in there for hours. Absolutely hours. She can't have been stuck on the bog all that time. So, yeah, I think there was some argument there. Although you notice, anyone who's read it, her letter of resignation was not rebellious at all. She's actually playing ball. So what I would say is don't be surprised if one of the following 2 things happens. One, that we have Teresa Coffey mentioned in the New Year's honours list. So don't be expected if she gets a damehood in the New Year's honours. If she doesn't, it might be she commanded an even higher price, in which case don't be surprised to see her in the House of Lords after the election. You know, it may well be that Rishi Sunak has himself a resignation honours list or a dissolution honours list that puts Teresa. I think she's going to get an honour because she is an influential Tory MP. She's been effectively sacked. She's gone quietly. She hasn't caused a fuss. Her resignation letter, there was no fuss in it. So she's been bought off with something. Wonder if Coffey will leave Parliament. I haven't actually checked her seat. I ought to probably do that at some point. I don't actually know whether she's in a safe seat or not. But it could easily be, like, she could just get a damehood out of it. That might be enough for her. If she's minded, because there are still a lot of Tory MPs who are going to step down who haven't announced it yet. There were a few doing so, but yesterday, I think, there will be more doing so. I think I think what the Tories are trying to do is manage it so that you don't have a flurry all announcing it at once. I think they're trying to have it like drip. But anyway, right, let's go on last few. She wasn't meant to be in Down Street by mistake. Her department sent her. That's not where they go to get sacked. Absolute cringe fest. Well, no, they do. But like I said, I'm not sure that Sunak was trying to sack her. He may have just been trying to move her. And she just said, look, I can't be arsed with this. Lord Fergal Shark at the same time. I'm not sure that Rishi Sunak wants him in the House of Lords, if I'm honest. But there we go. Right, I will just finish off. Just a little reminder. Games asked me to remind you. There's details in the description below. He's ramping up his campaign, UK for UKR, sending Lego to children in Ukraine at the end of this month, I believe. So don't forget to check that out. Thanks very much for coming on. Don't forget to click the like button and, of course, to subscribe to the channel. We will have to wait and see what other craziness happens over the next couple of weeks. I strongly suspect there won't really be a Tory civil war emerging from this, because I don't see how it's in any of their interest to do so. And there's probably only a limited number of nutters who will not realise that. So I suspect that Sunak is basically going to get away with this reshuffle reasonably comfortably. The Esther McVeigh is a weird one, but I haven't got time to talk about that now. I'll do that on my own channel maybe. But thanks very much. Have a very good day. And until next time, I'll see you later.